Welcome back to Biography Central. Ever wondered what inspired the profound writings of Ramana Maharshi? Join us as we delve into the creative heart of a sage whose verses were birthed not from ambition, but from a deep well of devotion and spontaneous inspiration. Discover how the written word became a pathway to self-knowledge for countless seekers. Welcome to our exploration of Ramana Maharshi and the path of self-knowledge. In this episode, we turn our attention to the remarkable written works of Sri Bhagavan, whose poetry and prose have captured the essence of spiritual inquiry. Although his writings may be few in number, each piece was crafted with profound intention, addressing the unique needs of his devotees. From the 11 stanzas to Sri Arunachala, to the timeless teachings encapsulated in Who Am I, Ramana's words illuminate the way for those on the spiritual path. Join us as we unravel the stories behind his writings and their transformative impact on seekers of truth. Chapter 16. The Written Works. The entire writings of Sri Bhagavan are very small in bulk, and even of them, then, nearly all were written to meet the specific needs of devotees. Devaraja Mudliyar records in his diary how Sri Bhagavan remarked on this when speaking about a visiting poet. All this is only activity of the mind. The more you exercise the mind, and the more success you have in composing verses, the less peace you have. What use is it to acquire such accomplishments if you don't acquire peace? But if you tell such people this, it doesn't appeal to them. They can't keep quiet. They must be composing songs. Somehow, it never occurs to me to write a book or compose poems. All the poems I have made were on the request of someone or other in connection with some particular event. Even 40 verses on reality, of which so many commentaries and translations now exist, was not planned as a book, but consists of verses composed at different times and afterwards arranged as a book by Muruganar and others. The only poems that came to me spontaneously and compelled me, as it were, to write them without anyone urging me to do so, are the 11 stanzas to Sri Arunachala and the 8 stanzas to Sri Arunachala. The opening words of the 11 stanzas came to me one morning, and even though I tried to suppress them, saying, "What have I to do with these words?" they would not be suppressed till I composed a song bringing them in. And all the words flowed easily, without any effort. In the same way, the second stanza was made the next day, and the succeeding ones the following days, one each day. Only the 10th and 11th were composed the same day. He went on to describe in his characteristically vivid way how he composed the 8 stanzas. The next day I started out to go around the hill. Palaniswami was walking behind me, and after we had gone some way, Ayasami seems to have called him back and given him a pencil and paper, saying, "For some days now Swami has been composing poems every day. He may do so today as well, so you had better take this paper and pencil with you." I learned about this only when I noticed that Palaniswami was not with me for a while, but caught me up later. That day, before I got back to Virupaksha, I wrote 6 of the 8 stanzas. Either that evening or the next day, Narayana Reddy came. He was at that time living in Vellore as an agent of Singer and Company, and he used to come from time to time. Ayasami and Palaniswami told him about the poems, and he said, "Give them to me at once, and I will go and get them printed." He had already published some books. When he insisted on taking the poems, I told him he could do so and could publish the first 11 as one form of poem and the rest, which were in a different meter, as another. To make up the required quota, I at once composed 2 more stanzas, and he took all the 19 stanzas with him to get them published. Many poets composed songs to Sri Bhagavan in various languages, outstanding among them being Ganapati Shastri in Sanskrit and Muruganar in Tamil. Although, in the conversation quoted above, Sri Bhagavan deprecated the writing of poetry as a dissipation of energy that could be turned inwards to sadhana. He listened graciously and showed interest when poems were sung before him. Prose books and articles about him were also written, and he would often have them read out and translated so that all could understand. One was struck by the extraordinary impersonality of his interest, the childlike innocence of it. There are 2 prose books which one might say were written by Sri Bhagavan. During the early years at Virupaksha, when he was still maintaining silence, he wrote out instructions on various occasions for Gumbiram Seshayar, and after Seshayar's death, these were arranged and published as a book under the title Self-Inquiry. Similarly, His replies given at the same period to Sivaprakasam Pillai were amplified and arranged in book form, as Who Am I? The other prose books that the ashram has published were not written by him, but are records of verbal expositions that he gave in answer to questions, and are therefore all in the form of dialogue. His poems fall into two groups: those which express rather the approach through bhakti, that is through love and devotion, and those which are more doctrinal. The first group is composed of the 5 hymns to Sri Arunachala, all written during the Virupaksh period. The element of devotion in them does not imply any abandonment of Advaita, but is perfectly fused with knowledge. They were written from the standpoint of the aspirant or devotee, even though he who wrote them was in fact established in the supreme knowledge, in the bliss of union, not the pain of longing. And it is for this reason that they appeal so powerfully to the heart of the devotee. Mention has already been made of 2 of them, the 8 stanzas and the 11 stanzas. In the latter, Sri Bhagavan not only wrote as an aspirant, but actually used the words, one who has not attained the supreme knowledge. Desiring an explicit confirmation, one of the devotees, a Bose, asked him why he wrote so, whether it was from the standpoint of the devotees and for their sake, and Sri Bhagavan admitted that it was so. The last of the 5 hymns, Sri Bhagavan wrote first in Sanskrit and then translated into Tamil. The story of its writing is astounding. Ganapati Shastri asked him to write a Sanskrit poem, and he replied, laughing, that he did not know the fundamentals of Sanskrit grammar or any Sanskrit meters. Shastri explained a meter to him and implored him to try. The same evening, he composed 5 perfect verses in Sanskrit. They have been rendered into English as follows: Ocean of nectar, full of grace, engulfing the universe in thy splendor. O Arunachala, the Supreme, be thou the sun, and open the lotus of my heart in bliss. O Arunachala, in thee the picture of the universe is formed, abides, and is dissolved. In this enigma rests the miracle of truth. Thou art the inner self who dancest in the heart, says I. Heart is thy name, O Lord. He who turns inward with untroubled mind to search where the consciousness of I arises realizes the self and rests in thee, O Arunachala, as a river when it merges in the ocean, abandoning the outer world, with mind and breath controlled, in order to meditate on thee within. The yogi sees thy light, O Arunachala, and finds his delight in thee. He who dedicates his mind to thee and, seeing thee, always beholds the universe as thy form, who at all times glorifies thee and loves thee as none other than the self. He is the master without peer, being one with thee, O Arunachala, and lost in thy bliss. These stanzas are more doctrinal than the other 4 hymns, epitomizing, as they do, the 3 main margas or approaches to realization. Speaking about them later, Sri Bhagavan explained, the 3rd stanza deals with the Sat aspect, being, the 4th with Chit consciousness, and the 5th with Ananda bliss. The Jnani becomes one with the Sat or reality like a river merging in the ocean. The yogi sees the light of Chit. The Bhakta or Karma yogi is immersed in the flood of Ananda. However, the most moving and beloved of the 5 hymns is the marital garland of 108 verses to Sri Arunachala, commonly known in English by its refrain, Arunachala Shiva. During the early years of Sri Bhagavan's abode at Virupaksh, Palaniswami and others used to go into town to beg food for the small group of devotees, and one day they asked Sri Bhagavan for a devotional song to sing as they went. He replied that there were plenty of sublime songs composed by the saints, many of them neglected, so there was no need to compose a new one. However, they continued to urge him, and some days later he set out on pradakshina around the hill, taking a pencil and paper with him, and on the way, composed the 108 verses. Tears of ecstasy streamed down his face as he wrote, sometimes blinding his eyes and choking his voice. The poem became the great devotional inspiration of the devotees. All the pain of longing and all the bliss of fulfillment are mirrored in its glowing symbolism. The perfection of knowledge is combined with the ecstasy of devotion. And yet this most heartfelt of poems was composed from the standpoint of the devotee, of one who is still seeking. It is also an acrostic, its 108 verses beginning with the successive letters of the Tamil alphabet. Nevertheless, No poem could be more spontaneous. Some devotees asked Sri Bhagwan the interpretation of some of the verses, and he replied, "You think it out, and I will too. I didn't think while I was composing it. I just wrote as it came." There is an ancient legend that a party of rishis or sages, living with their families in a forest, were practicing karmas, that is, ritualistic and devotional acts and incantations, by which they had attained supernatural powers and hoped eventually to obtain the supreme deliverance. In this, however, they were mistaken. In order to convince them of their error, Shiva appeared before them as a mendicant, accompanied by Vishnu in the guise of Mohini, a beautiful lady. All the rishis fell in love with Mohini and their wives with Shiva, with the result that their equanimity was disturbed and their powers began to wane. Seeing this, they decided that Shiva must be an enemy and conjured up serpents, and a tiger and elephant that they sent against him. Shiva, however, merely took the serpents for a garland, and, slaying the tiger and elephant, used the skin of the former as a loincloth and of the latter as a shawl. The rishis thereupon, recognizing his greater power, bowed down before him and besought him to give them Upadesa, or guidance. Only then did Shiva explain to them their error, teaching that action cannot bring release from action, that karma is the mechanism, not the cause of creation, and that it is necessary to go beyond action to contemplation. The poet and devotee Muruganar wrote this story in Tamil verse, but when he reached the point where Shiva gives instruction to the rishis, he besought Bhagwan, who is Shiva incarnate, to write it. Thereupon Bhagwan composed the Upadesa Saram, or instruction, in 30 verses in which, beginning with devout and disinterested activity, he explains that beneficent as this is, incantations are more effective, silent incantations again more effective than those uttered aloud, and more effective still contemplation. Sri Bhagwan translated the 30 verses into Sanskrit, and the Sanskrit version is regarded as a scripture in that it was chanted daily before Sri Bhagwan together with the Vedas and is now so chanted before his Samadhi shrine of grace. The doctrine taught by Sri Bhagwan is enunciated the most comprehensively in this poem, and in the Oladunar Padu, or 40 verses on reality together with its supplement of a second 40 verses. Many translations have been made of the 40 verses on reality and commentaries written on it. It has a universality and a condensed wisdom that demands commentary. And yet, as Sri Bhagwan remarked in the conversation quoted above, it was not written as a continuous poem, but the verses were composed from time to time as occasion arose. Some of the supplementary 40 were not even composed by Sri Bhagwan himself, but culled from other sources, for when an adequate verse existed elsewhere, he saw no need to write a new one. Nevertheless, the whole is the most complete and profound enunciation of his doctrine. Apart from these two groups, there are a few short poems also. Humor is not lacking among them. One contains instructions for sadhana under the symbolism of a recipe for making papadum, a favorite South Indian savory. The mother of Sri Bhagwan was making it one day and asked him to help, and he thereupon spontaneously wrote the symbolical recipe for her. The poet Avair once wrote a complaint against the stomach. "You will not go without food even for one day, nor will you take enough for 2 days at a time. You have no idea of the trouble I have on your account. O wretched stomach, it is impossible to get on with you." One day there had been feasting at the ashram, and all were feeling more or less uneasy, and Sri Bhagwan parroted Avair's stanza. "You will not give even an hour's rest to me, your stomach. Day after day, every hour, you keep on eating. You have no idea how I suffer. Oh, troublemaking ego. It is impossible to get on with you." It was in 1947 that Sri Bhagwan wrote his last poem. This time it was not in response to any request, and yet it had something of the appearance of a tour de force, since he wrote it first in Telugu, but to a Tamil metrical form, and then translated it into Tamil. It was called Ekatma Punchakam, 5 verses on the self. Forgetting the self, mistaking the body for the self, going through innumerable births and finally finding and being the self. This is just like waking up from a dream of wandering all over the world. He who asks, "Who am I?" although existing as the self, is like a drunken man who asks about his own identity and whereabouts, when in fact the body is in the self, To think that the self is within the insentient body is like thinking that the cinema screen on which a figure is projected is inside the figure. Has the ornament any existence apart from the gold of which it is made? Where is the body apart from the self? The ignorant mistake the body for the self, but the jnani, knower of the self, perceives the self as the self. That one self, the reality, alone exists forever. If even the primal guru, Adi Guru, Dakshin Almorthy, revealed it in silence, who can convey it in speech? There are also a few translations, mainly from Shankaracharya. A visitor to Virupaksha cave once left there a copy of Shankaracharya's Vivekachudamani. After looking through it, Sri Bhagwan recommended Gambhiram Seshaya to read it. He, however, did not know Sanskrit, so he wanted it in Tamil. Palaniswami obtained a loan of a Tamil verse rendering, and Seshaya, seeing it, wrote to the publishers for a copy, but was told that it was but of print. He therefore asked Sri Bhagwan to make a simple rendering in Tamil prose. Sri Bhagwan began to write one, but before he had got far with it, Seshaya received the verse edition he had ordered, so he left the work uncompleted. A few years later, on the earnest request of another devotee, he took up the work again and finished it. Only then did the devotee say that his purpose in pressing for its completion had been to get it published. Hearing this, Sri Bhagwan wrote a preface saying that a free prose version might be of use even though a Tamil verse rendering already existed. The preface itself contains an epitome of the book and a concise exposition of doctrine and the path. The last thing he ever wrote was a Tamil translation of Shankaracharya's Atmabodha. It had been with him in Virupaksha in the very early days, but he had never thought of translating it. In 1949, a Tamil translation, perhaps not a very perfect one, was sent to the ashram, and shortly afterwards Sri Bhagwan himself felt the urge to make one. For some days he ignored it, but the words of the translation rose up before him, verse by verse, as though already written. So he asked for paper and pencil and wrote them down. So completely effortless was the work that he said, laughing, that he was afraid some other author might come along and claim that the work was really his and had been copied. Also among the works of Sri Bhagwan is a compilation of 42 verses from the Bhagavad Gita which, on the request of a devotee, he selected and rearranged to express his teaching. This has been translated into English under the name The Song Celestial. In this episode, we discuss the transformative teachings of Ramana Maharshi and how they guided countless souls on their path to self-realization. If you were inspired by that journey, you won't want to miss our next episode, where we delve into the final moments of this enlightened master. Join us as we witness the events leading to his Mahasamadhi, where his indifference to bodily pain and profound understanding of life and death illuminate the way for seekers everywhere. Click to listen and embrace the wisdom of Ramana Maharshi in his last chapter. Thank you for listening till the end. Please subscribe, turn on the notifications, like, comment, and share with your friends. This will help more listeners to discover our channel and content.